Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a massive leap from the modern movie screen straight back into the heart of African history. We're going to be looking at one of the most powerful and, honestly, most sophisticated states to ever emerge in the West African forest region. We are talking about the mighty Oyo Empire. Okay, let's dive into this. If you're a fan of modern cinema, especially those visually stunning Nollywood epics, movies like Bashorun Gaa or House of Gakka, you've definitely seen depictions of these fierce, larger-than-life Oyo warlords and prime ministers wielding just terrifying amounts of power. But for anyone wanting to truly grasp the history here, a huge question naturally pops up. Are these cinematic portrayals actually rooted in historical fact, or are they entirely the product of dramatic fiction? Well, to answer that, we've got to separate the cinematic flair from the on-the-ground historical reality. While these films are absolutely spectacular to watch, they do sometimes blur a few crucial details. For example, recent movie adaptations have actually mislabeled the empire's political roles, substituting the word Ilari when they really mean Ajele. In the real Oyo Empire, an Ajele was a heavily empowered resident official appointed directly by the king to govern provincial towns with a good deal of autonomy. And Olari, on the other hand, that was simply a royal messenger. Now, grasping this distinction isn't just us nitpicking a movie script, it's absolutely key to unlocking how the real Oyo Empire functioned and held onto its vast territorial control. Section 1. Architecture of an Empire. So, stepping away from the movie sets for a second, how exactly was this 18th century powerhouse actually built? If we trace its origins all the way back to founders like Oranyan, who was a prince of Ile-Ife, we see that Oyo definitely didn't become an empire overnight. By 1790, it was the largest state in the forest region, and this was thanks to a few very distinct pillars. Geographically, its location gave it rich, fertile soil for agriculture, and a pretty solid natural defensive barrier. Technologically, their advanced ironworking produced superior farm tools and, of course, deadly military weapons. Militarily, the introduction of horses from North Africa allowed Oyo to build a formidable cavalry, which was a huge rarity in the forest region. And economically, the empire amassed just immense wealth by acting as heavily armed middlemen in the transatlantic slave trade. Right at the very top of this incredibly affluent and rapidly expanding society sat the Alaafin. The Alaafin was the constitutional monarch, the supreme authority, and the ultimate owner of the palace. He was revered as this semi-divine figure with just incredible influence. But, and this is a huge but, while the Alaafin's the ultimate ruler, he was definitely not an absolute dictator. The sheer genius of Oyo's political architecture was its deeply complex system of checks and balances. You see, the Alaafins' power was directly balanced by the Oyo Mesi. This was a highly powerful council of elders and kingmakers. Headed up by the prime minister, who was known as the Bashorun, this council basically functioned as the legislative branch of the entire empire. If an Alaafin became way too tyrannical or completely lost the favor of the people, the Oyo Mesi had the constitutional right to flat out reject him. And get this, custom dictated that a rejected Alaafin was literally forced to commit suicide. I know, it's a drastic measure, but it was highly effective in preventing a dictatorship. Though, as you'll see in a minute, this exact mechanism also set the stage for some really intense political power struggles down the line. The final piece of this triad of power was the Kankafo, or Are Onakakanfo. This was the supreme military commander, essentially the field marshal, who commanded both the formidable Oyo infantry and that rare cavalry we talked about. They were the absolute tip of the spear when it came to Oyo's massive territorial expansion. Now, what's really fascinating here is the incredibly unique and frankly shocking cultural rule that governed this specific military role. If the Konkwafos suffered a defeat in battle, custom dictated that they couldn't just retreat and go home. No, they were bound by honor to commit suicide. It's an incredibly harsh reality, but historians point out that this stark consequence served as the ultimate motivation. It drove Oyo commanders to fight with just absolute ferocity and to relentlessly expand the borders of the empire. Section 2. Gaa's Reign of Terror. So what happens when this entire system, explicitly designed to prevent tyranny, gets completely hijacked? Well, enter Bashorun Gaa. He served as prime minister during a period of just unbelievable prosperity for Oyo, a time when conquered vassal states were paying massive sums to the capital. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer economic scale of that power. The kingdom of Dahomey alone paid an annual tribute of 40 guns, 400 loads of cowrie shells, and 40 men and women as slaves. It was a fortune.
Gaa began to usurp the Alaafins' authority, violently hoarding these immense tributes all for his own household, and installing his own kin as the Ajale, those powerful provincial governors we mentioned earlier.
To maintain his total stranglehold on the empire's wealth and military, Gaa fully weaponized the Oyo Mesi's constitutional power to reject the monarch. The year 1754 basically became a bloodbath. In July of 1754, Alaafin Labisi was forced into suicide after just 17 days on the throne. By October, his successor, Awambaju, lasted barely 130 days before meeting the exact same fate, and by late 1754, a third Alaafin, Ogbalaj, was forced to commit suicide simply because he refused Gaa's direct order to declare an expansionist war. Gaa had essentially made himself the empire's true unelected dictator. This tyrannical run lasted for 2 brutal decades, casting a really dark shadow over the entire empire. It was only finally brought to an end in 1774. Alaafin Abiodun, teaming up with the empire's top military commander, orchestrated a brief but incredibly violent civil war that completely annihilated Gaa's entire household. The tyrant was finally gone, but unfortunately, the structural integrity of the Oyo Empire was permanently damaged. Section 3. The Collapse and the Yoruba Civil Wars. Gaa subversions really exposed a fatal flaw in the government, setting off a tragic domino effect. We can actually track the breakdown of the empire in 4 distinct steps. First, you had the lingering toxic distrust between the Alaafins and the Oyo Mesi, which created a permanent constitutional crisis right at the center of power. Second, sensing this internal weakness, powerful vassal states realized they simply didn't need to pay tribute anymore. The military commander Afonja broke off and declared the state of Ilorin independent, and the incredibly wealthy state of Dahomey followed right behind. Third, without a strong central authority to keep the peace, the various Yoruba states began violently attacking each other for dominance, sparking the massive Yoruba civil wars. And fourth, this chaotic fragmentation paved the perfect, wide-open path for British colonial intervention. And to put it in perspective, the resulting Yoruba civil wars were not just some brief skirmish. They lasted a staggering 72 years. They dragged on from 1821 all the way to 1893. Decades of this continuous internal conflict severely depopulated the entire region and left the economy in absolute ruins. During this massive 72-year period, sweeping global shifts were dealing the final fatal blows to the independent empire. The global abolition of the transatlantic slave trade completely shattered Oyo's traditional revenue streams, forcing a really difficult transition over to the legitimate trade of palm oil. At the exact same time, the empire was under intense military pressure from the north as the Fulani Jihad repeatedly attacked and eventually occupied the old capital. Finally, looking to protect their own commercial interests in those new palm oil routes, the British stepped in. They forced treaties in 1888 and 1893 that effectively absorbed whatever was left of Oyo right into the British colonial protectorate. Section 4. The Birth of New Oyo. But you know what? The story absolutely does not end in the ashes. Much like a phoenix, a brand new cultural capital arose. With the ancient capital of Old Oyo, known as Oyo Ile, completely destroyed, the survivors made a brilliant strategic retreat. Led by Alaafin Atipa in the late 1830s, they relocated much further south into the forest to establish a brand new settlement. They called it Oyo Atipa, or New Oyo. This wasn't just them running away, it was a deliberate, highly strategic move to preserve the Yoruba people's statehood, their rich spiritual traditions, and their cultural continuity in the face of absolute destruction. Let's move to and see how this builds through the physical city itself. The architecture of New Oyo actually serves as a physical timeline of its incredible survival and adaptation. It all started with traditional Yoruba architecture, sprawling palaces built with mud walls and impluviums to catch the rainwater. Then, with the colonial era, came the introduction of corrugated iron roofs and cement blocks, which created a really unique hybrid style. And today, the city is a vibrant modern hub featuring reinforced concrete and glass structures, highlighted by gorgeous institutions like the renowned Ajajai Crowther University. Today, New Oyo operates fully within the modern Federal Republic of Nigeria. And sure, while it obviously no longer commands the sprawling military empire of the 18th century, its cultural and social structures have proven to be incredibly resilient. The modern Alaafin, like the late Lamidi Adeyemi III, who reigned for a truly remarkable 52 years, stands today as a profoundly respected spiritual and cultural guardian. It's fascinating because the monarchy successfully transitioned from an expansionist military power into this deeply revered institution that continues to unite the Yoruba people globally. It's just an incredibly fascinating journey from the fierce military heights of Bashorun Gaa all the way to the lasting cultural resilience of New Oyo. As you can see, the historical reality is way more nuanced, structural, and frankly, fascinating than any movie script could ever fully capture. And it leaves us with a really provocative thought. As we look at how New Oyo carefully preserves the legacy of a once-fallen empire, what parts of our own modern political systems and societies will survive the test of time? Centuries from now, what parts of our world will become the cinematic myths of tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. And remember to always keep questioning the history behind the screen.